Hello, it's good to see you. Today we're going to do a slow reading of some recipes for biscuits and rolls. Now these are American biscuits, which is kind of like a scone, but it's not sweet. Delectable buttermilk biscuits, crusty dinner rolls, and flaky crescent rolls are a sampling of the home-baked goodness found in this section. First, we have whole wheat sandwich rolls, and here they are. This recipe has 30 minutes preparation plus rising and 30 minutes baking. These special rolls have a hearty, nutty flavor with just a touch of sweetness. This recipe makes 16 rolls, and you will need 1 package of active dry yeast, 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar, 1/4 cup of warm water, 105 degrees to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 cups of buttermilk at room temperature, 1/4 cup of molasses, 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 teaspoons of distilled white vinegar, 4½ cups of whole wheat flour, 1 to 1½ cups of all-purpose flour plus additional for dusting. And here are the steps. We have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 steps to make these sandwich rolls. Step number 1. In a large bowl, dissolve yeast and granulated sugar in warm water. Let stand until foamy, 5 to 10 minutes. Step number 2. Mix together buttermilk, molasses, salt, and vinegar. Stir into yeast mixture. Step number 3. Using a heavy-duty electric mixer fitted with the paddle attachment and set on low speed, beat whole wheat flour into yeast mixture, 1/2 cup at a time, until a stiff dough forms. Step number 4. Turn dough out onto a floured surface and knead until smooth and elastic, 5 to 10 minutes. Kneading in all-purpose flour. Place dough in a large greased bowl, turning to coat. Cover loosely with a damp cloth. Let rise in a warm place until doubled, about 1 hour. Step number 5. Grease 2 large baking sheets. Punch down dough. On a floured surface, knead dough until smooth and elastic, 1 to 2 minutes. Using hands, roll dough into a fat rope. Cut into 16 equal pieces. Shape each piece into a small flat roll. Step number 6. Place rolls 3 to 4 inches apart on prepared baking sheets. Using a fork, prick tops of rolls. Cover loosely with a damp cloth. Let rise in a warm place until almost doubled, about 30 minutes. Step number 7. Preheat oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Brush roll tops with water and dust with all-purpose flour. Step number 8. Bake rolls until lightly browned, 30 minutes. Transfer rolls to a wire rack to cool slightly. Serve warm. And on the back, we have this recipe for hearty breakfast biscuits, and they look like this. Start the day right with these savory biscuits and thinly sliced sharp Wisconsin cheddar. 30 minutes preparation and 20 minutes baking. This will make 14 biscuits. And as a baking tip, using chilled butter creates a particularly flaky biscuit. For the hearty breakfast biscuits, you will need 1 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 3/4 of a cup of yellow cornmeal, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes, 1/4 teaspoon of dried thyme, 6 tablespoons or 3/4 of a stick of chilled butter cut into small pieces, 5 slices of cooked bacon crumbled, 1 tablespoon of finely chopped green onion, and 1 cup of milk. And we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps to make the biscuits. Step number 1. Preheat oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Grease a baking sheet. Step number 2. In a large bowl, mix together flour, cornmeal, baking powder, salt, red pepper flakes, and thyme. Using a pastry blender or 2 knives, cut butter into flour mixture until coarse crumbs form. Step number 3. Stir in crumbled bacon and green onion. Step number 4. Make a well in the center of flour mixture. Add milk all at once to well, tossing with a fork until dry ingredients are just moistened. Do not overmix. Step number 5. On a floured surface, pat dough to a 3/4 inch thickness. Using a floured 2-inch round biscuit cutter, cut out biscuits. gather trimmings, pat to a 3/4 inch thickness, and cut out more biscuits. Place 1 inch apart on prepared baking sheet. And step number 6. Bake biscuits until golden, 20 minutes. Transfer baking sheet to a wire rack to cool slightly. That is the Hearty breakfast biscuits recipe. And next we have Buttermilk Biscuits. They look like this. The buttermilk makes this traditional southern specialty especially light and tender. A baking tip: to produce flaky biscuits, take care not to overhandle the dough. For less waste and a speedier preparation, pat the dough into a square, then cut into square-shaped biscuits with a floured knife. Bake as directed above. It will be 15 minutes of preparation and 12 to 15 minutes baking. This recipe makes 12 biscuits, and you will need 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 5 tablespoons of chilled solid vegetable shortening, and 1 cup of buttermilk. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. Step number 1. Preheat the oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. In a large bowl, sift together flour, baking powder, salt, and baking soda. Using a pastry blender or 2 knives, cut the shortening into the flour mixture until coarse crumbs form. Step number 2. Add the buttermilk, tossing with a fork until a dough forms. Step number 3. Turn dough out onto a lightly floured surface. Gather into a disc. Knead lightly a few times just until smooth. The dough can be made up to 2 hours ahead, wrapped in plastic wrap, and refrigerated until ready to use. Step number 4. Pat the dough to 3/4 inch thick. Using a biscuit cutter or a glass dipped in flour, cut out biscuits. Place the biscuits 2 inches apart on an ungreased baking sheet. Gather dough trimmings. Pat to 3/4 inch thick and cut out more biscuits. Step number 5. Bake the biscuits until golden, 12 to 15 minutes. Serve hot. That is the recipe, a recipe for buttermilk biscuits. There are other ways to make them. This is one way. Now this is a recipe for butter crescents. Start the day on a high note with a cup of tea and these melt in your mouth crescents. A baking tip. Knead dough very gently to keep rolls tender. They look very nice. They look very nice. For the butter crescents, you will have 30 minutes preparation, 1 hour, 40 minutes rising and resting, 15 minutes baking. And it will make 1 dozen crescents. For these butter crescents, you will need 1/2 cup of milk, 1/2 cup, 1 stick of butter softened, 1/3 of a cup of granulated sugar, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 package of active dry yeast, 1/2 cup of warm water, 105 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 large egg, lightly beaten, 3½ to 4 cups of all-purpose flour. And for the glaze, you will need 1 large egg, lightly beaten. And we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 steps to make butter crescents. Step number 1. In a saucepan, heat milk until bubbles appear around edges of pan. Combine butter, sugar, and salt. Add hot milk, stir well. Cool to lukewarm, 95 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Step number 2. In a small bowl, dissolve yeast in warm water. Let stand until foamy, 5 to 10 minutes. Step number 3. Beat yeast mixture and egg into milk mixture at low speed. Beat in 2 cups of flour at low speed until smooth. Continue beating until thick. Mix in enough remaining flour until dough pulls away from sides of bowl. Step number 4. On a floured surface, knead dough very gently until smooth and elastic, 2 to 3 minutes. Place in a large greased bowl, turning to coat. Cover loosely with a damp cloth. Let rise in a warm place until doubled, 1 hour. Step number 5. Punch down dough. On a floured surface, divide dough in half. Cover with a damp cloth and let rest for 10 minutes. Step number 6. Grease 2 baking sheets. Using a floured rolling pin, roll 1 dough half into a 12-inch circle. Cut circle into 6 wedges. Starting at side opposite point, roll up each wedge. Place point sides down on prepared baking sheets. Curve ends to form crescents. Repeat with remaining dough half. number 7. Cover loosely with a damp cloth. Let rise in a warm place until almost doubled, 30 minutes. Step number 8. Preheat oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Brush crescents with glaze. Bake until golden, 15 minutes. Transfer to a wire rack to cool. And that is the recipe for butter crescents. Next, we have dinner roll trio. A basket of these freshly baked rolls will add an elegant touch to a special dinner party. They look like this. And baking tips. The ingredients in this recipe will yield 2 dozen rolls for either the coxcombs or the sesame horns or the rosebud dinner rolls. This recipe will require 45 minutes preparation, 2 hours rising and resting, 8 to 10 minutes baking. It will make 2 dozen rolls, and you will need 1 package of active dry yeast, 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar, 1 1/4 cups of warm milk, 105 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, 1/3 of a cup of butter softened, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 3½ cups of all-purpose flour. For the glaze and topping, you need 1 large egg, lightly beaten, and sesame or poppy seeds. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 steps for the dinner roll trio. Step number 1. In a large bowl, dissolve yeast and sugar in warm milk. Let stand until foamy, 5 to 10 minutes. Step number 2. Add butter and salt to yeast mixture. Mix well. Stir flour, 1/2 cup at a time, into yeast mixture until a stiff dough forms. Step number 3. On a floured surface, knead dough until smooth and elastic, 5 to 10 minutes. Shape into a ball. Place in a large greased bowl, turning to coat. Cover loosely with a damp cloth. Let rise in a warm place until doubled, 1 hour. Step number 4. Punch down dough. Place on a floured surface. Divide in half. Cover loosely with a damp cloth. Let rest for 10 minutes. Grease 2 large baking sheets. Step number 5. To prepare coxcombs, roll each dough half into a fat rope. Divide each rope into 12 equal pieces. prepared baking sheets. Cover loosely with a damp cloth. Let rise in a warm place until almost doubled, 45 minutes. Step number 6. To prepare rosebud dinner rolls. Roll each dough half into a fat rope. Divide each rope into 12 equal pieces. Shape each piece into a ball. Place rolls 3 inches apart on prepared baking sheets. Cover loosely with a damp cloth. Let rise in a warm place until almost doubled, about 45 minutes. Step number 7. To prepare sesame horns, roll dough into a 12-inch circle. Cut into 12 equal wedges, starting at side opposite point. Roll up each wedge into a horn. Place rolls point sides down on prepared baking sheets. Cover loosely with a damp cloth. Let rise in a warm place until puffy, 30 to 35 minutes. Step number 8. Preheat oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Slash tops of coxcombs and rosebuds dinner rolls. Brush rolls with beaten egg and sprinkle with sesame seeds. Step number 9. Bake rolls until lightly browned, 8 to 10 minutes. Transfer baking sheets to wire racks to cool slightly. That is the recipe for the dinner roll trio. And this is our last one for today. This is a recipe for applesauce biscuits. These quickly prepared cardamom-scented treats have a luscious filling of applesauce and a baking dip. To cut preparation time even further and vary the filling, use a jar of your favorite jam or marmalade instead of the applesauce. Do not simmer. This will require 30 minutes of preparation and 12 minutes of baking, and they do look quite yummy. For the applesauce biscuits, you will need, for the filling, 2 cups of sweetened applesauce. For the biscuits, 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of ground cardamom, 1/2 of a cup or 1 stick of chilled butter cut into small pieces, 1 large egg, and 1/4 cup of heavy cream or milk. For the glaze, you will need 1 large egg, lightly beaten, and for the garnish, 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. This recipe will give you 10 applesauce biscuits. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps. Step number 1. Preheat oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Line a baking sheet with full. Step number 2. To prepare filling, in a medium saucepan, simmer applesauce over medium heat until thickened and all of the excess liquid has evaporated, about 15 minutes. Step number 3. To prepare the biscuits, in a large bowl, mix together the flour, sugar, baking powder, and the cardamom. Using a pastry blender or 2 knives, cut butter into flour mixture until coarse crumbs form. Step number 4. In a small bowl, mix together egg and cream. Stir into the flour mixture until dough forms. Step number 5. On a lightly floured surface, roll out dough to a 20 by 8 inch rectangle. Cut into 10 4-inch squares. Spread 1 tablespoon of applesauce across the center of each square to within 1/2 inch of edge. Roll up each square. Pinch the seam to seal. Place biscuits, seam side down, on the prepared baking sheet. Step number 6. Brush tops with the glaze and sprinkle with the sugar. And step number 7. Bake the biscuits until golden, about 12 minutes. Transfer the baking sheet to a wire rack to cool slightly and serve warm. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed these recipes. I hope to see you again very soon.